Good afternoon. I'm down on the program to talk about research, which I'm not going to do totally because people have already covered it so very well over the last day and a half, especially yesterday morning in the thorough review of where research has got us so far by Claire Cooper. What I am going to talk about, though, is an attitude that I think we all have to children, which affects the research we do and the way we plan for children, and makes it highly unsatisfactory in my mind. I think that this Habitat Forum in general is really concerned with human growth and development through environment. And so the children's part of this right here is not a separate part, it just happens to be the beginning of it all. Many of the sessions I could equally talk about exactly the same thing. I could be in a self-help housing group, for example, this afternoon. I found most commonality in my concerns with children with their kinds of discussions about adults. And so, before I begin discussing what I think happened yesterday with the kinds of research that was reported, I'd like to say that, and your comments on this from people in different parts of the world would really be welcomed, that in our society at least, I think that we really applaud ourselves for the way we care for children. But I think we're dreadfully unconcerned about questions of how they really develop. And I think that the press and the kinds of attention they always show for conferences like this to children indicate the kinds of attitudes we have. I think it's very self-indulgent very often. First of all, I'd like us to think a little bit, I hope you were all there yesterday morning, of the whole range of things that were suggested. Claire Cooper and Arvid Bengtsson, and to a certain extent Barbara Ward, pointed out a lot of environment behavior problems and solutions to them, with children in mind. There have been attempts in recent years, especially over the last couple of years, to try and compile all of these ideas for designers and planners. It becomes a massive task, as you can imagine. It becomes a compendium task. The problem with that is, one, of course, planners and designers don't have a lot of time, and two, we can never be sure that we're going to be rich enough to cover every unique situation. I've often heard that from the planning profession. Every situation is unique, how can we have guidelines? Well, in listening yesterday, I set myself the exercise of trying to find some underlying concepts that ran through what everybody was saying. I came up with 3 or 4. I'll give you them. First of all, there was a discussion of what I would call the importance of diversity. It was mentioned by all 3 speakers in the morning. As a basic ecological principle, children should have the choice to contact a wide range of environments, a rich, diverse set of environmental experiences. And so when Claire Cooper talked about fire and Arvid Bengtsson talked about animals, they were simply pointing to this need for all of us to experience in early childhood diversity. What this means for planners is not a specific point which they always want from us. It means a way of thinking about children. Namely that children will demonstrate in their own movements through the environment and their own selections what they consider to be important. We should be sure to provide the opportunity for them to find diversity. Simple principle. Another major point that ran through a lot of things that was being discussed is what I would call the opportunity to learn. Danger was discussed, for example, by Barbara Ward and others. The thing about danger is that we usually... Are you still hearing me? Hello? Okay. Are you really hearing me loud at the back? Yes? Great. Okay. The thing about danger is that dealing with that, we don't want to remove danger. Neither do we want, as I've heard many people say, to give danger opportunities to make an exciting environment for children. What we're really concerned is that they have the opportunity to engage with danger without breaking their neck. And what's concerned there is negotiation. Children should have the opportunity to negotiate in a relatively safe way with the environment. And when you start to look at the dynamics of that, you realize something that's fundamental to all of these things. Namely that we shouldn't just be looking at children in the environment, but children as part of a complex social and physical system. And in the example that Barbara Ward gave us, for example, she talked about parents not being able to watch their children from 300 feet up in a high-rise situation because they can't take care of the children, they can't watch them. In fact, it's really not that way at all. If we're concerned with human development, we are concerned with children being able to find themselves engaging with the world independently and competently, which often requires them being completely outside of their parents, even from a very young age. What should never be broken, though, is the opportunity for one of those two elements, namely a parent or child, to contact the other whenever he or she wants. So it's a dynamic, interactive situation. It nearly always is. We never talk in terms of interactions. Rarely do we talk in terms of relationships. We always come up with piecemeal statements about this situation, this problem, this problem, this problem. Only when you start to combine these things do you start to see these dynamics. To give you an example of that, beyond the high-rise situation, if I could just elaborate a little more, this is not new stuff. It's just that psychologists don't talk about this anymore because they don't deal with complex, dynamic, interactive systems, as you all know. Froebel, who is my hero, 100 and odd years ago, 150 years ago, talked about this when he was conceptualizing the kindergarten, which means children's garden. And he wrote a book on the education of man where he really discusses how parents have to really allow their children to grow. For example, climbing a tree. If you reach out and catch the kid every time, the kid will never learn to climb a tree. Furthermore, he'll never dare to climb a tree. Another example, much closer to home for all of us, busing. I found, and others of my colleagues have found, that children do not know from a very young age how their home relates to school. That is to say, they have no conception mentally of where they are in relationship to their mother or their father. That's especially crucial in our society with regard to the mother because, as you know, she's usually the caretaker. What this means is that if that child's ever in trouble or feels in trouble, the child will be really disturbed because he or she cannot maintain that link. Busing, of course, is really discussed a lot. I have still, to this day, not read any kind of sensitive discussion of what busing means for children. There is never any statement of the experience of busing. Not just the ride, but what it means when you get to the end of the journey, away from home. So what I'm appealing for there, in all of this, is an ecological approach to looking at children. Looking at them as organisms as part of a complex environment. Again, in terms of competence, children should have opportunities to make all kinds of decisions themselves. We heard from Robin Moore, from Claire Cooper, from Arvid Bengtsson, that children should be able to manipulate the environment. That's one kind of manipulation, that is, building things, making things, super important. I could document to you in a very vivid way how much more that is denied girls in our society than boys. Again, I can't talk very confidently about other cultures, only North America and Western Europe. Also, the way one is allowed to move away from the home is really a kind of manipulation. And if you find your space entirely defined by adults and your movements in time, that is, your day done by adults and prescribed, as we find, I'm afraid, especially in suburban North America, what that means is that children have very few opportunities to make decisions for themselves. That is extremely important. I think suburban America really prides itself on its care for children. It's gone too far. Furthermore, it's conceived of it wrongly, I think. It's conceived of it in terms of caretaking. The same is true of planning. We always think in terms of particular problems, particular solutions. Always in terms of taking care. The kinds of research that's been done so far has been, not surprisingly in North America, the objective, observational study of where children are and aren't. Distributions. Claire showed us one example yesterday of such a distribution of a housing area. Fortunately, she's one of the few people who does a whole host of other things to find out where children are at. But that kind of study is on the basis of that kind of study that we've made decisions. There are a whole lot of things wrong with that. One of them is that we know nothing about who those children are. By the way, we don't do this just with children, we do this with adults too. This is where decisions are made. If you don't know who the child is that you've observed and put on your maps, then you really can't say anything about all of the things I was just saying was important. Namely their relationship to the home, to the mother, to the father, to diversity, that is, to a range of diversity. You can't discuss things that are important for planners. So, in summarizing that part, I think there are two things that planners could do. If you tell them too much, they might not handle it. But if you give them fundamental concepts, they can work around because they've got a lot of other complex things to consider. One is to maximize children's range. Another is to make the landscape as diverse as possible. Those two qualities interacting with each other will make for a rich environment. Trouble with that is, though, we don't know what landscape diversity is for children because, again, a weakness of research, we never ask the kids. So we use traditional land use categories that planners have defined for us over the years. We record where kids are and where they aren't, and we use that as the basis for decision making. No wonder we come up with no new ideas, because we haven't asked the children. There are research techniques now being developed to enable us to do that, to let children to express for us how many, for example, different kinds of dirt they discriminate. Adults don't discriminate one. Dirt and grass are broken down many, many times over. You ask Robin more of that than anybody else who's worked closely with children. Finally, because I'm being told down here that I got to hurry up, there needs to be an emphasis in education on all of this. Children, well, before we get on to that very quickly, research approaches that you can use with children, if made direct with them, if you share the purpose of your research, they will thoroughly trust and engage with you in research. In New York and in Harvard, we have research going off right now with children, with young children. I've got research associates age 10 in Manhattan collecting data which they thoroughly understand is going to be used someday. Teenagers doing the same kind of work in Harvard are also coming up with information. I consider this information is going to be much more useful for us than all of the objective distant data we've been getting so far. I think more exciting than all of that is to think from a very early age in schools of allowing children to develop as decision makers. Really encouraging them to think from the very beginning that they have abilities, that they are competent, and they have some responsibility to engage with their environment in an active way and to create settings for themselves. So that when people like are struggling in the self-help housing program are wondering why it is that so many people in the world have been disenfranchised, you should look to education. Because it's in formal education systems in this society and all societies that are being discussed, at least at this conference, that the destruction occurs. It's there that we're told we are incompetent, we are incapable of creating environments for ourselves. Right now we have here in Vancouver one fellow by the name of Stanley King who's developed one approach. There aren't too many people in the world doing this. One approach which enables children to engage with adults in a design-in, which is a community planning participation process in which they present on an equal basis their ideas with adults. If you want to talk about that or find out more about it or any of the other stuff I'm talking about, you can see me, or better still, you can write to us through the Childhood City newsletter. most people who've discussed here from North America in this conference belong to this network called Childhood City. There's some cover sheets here of Childhood City which you can take away. If you want any information, or if you want to say something, you want to communicate, so far there's 500 of us, designers, planners, researchers, educators, communicating on these kinds of issues. I'd like to say a lot more, but I'm taking time away from everybody else. So I'll finish now, and if you want to chat more later in the sun, I think that would be nicer anyway. Thanks.